Next up, Amendment 3. Its title is All Voters Vote in Primary Elections for State Legislature, Governor, and Cabinet. Here's what a yes vote would mean. All voters would be able to cast ballots in the August primary election regardless of whether they belong to a political party or are independent. The candidates with the most votes would advance to the general election. If only 2 candidates qualify for a race, no primary is held, and the winner will be determined in the general election. Each candidate's party affiliation may appear on the ballot, but there's more to it than that, as you'll soon see in our debate.
Joining us are Glenn Burhans, chairman of All Voters Vote, the group behind the measure, Michelle Rayner, civil rights attorney and the Democratic state representative-elect in House District 70 in the Tampa Bay area, and Ben Gibson, an attorney for Schutzenbauern, who argued against Amendment 3 before the state Supreme Court on behalf of the Republican Party of Florida. Thank you all for being here. Our first question is for Mr. Burhans. Please explain why you believe the type of primary is good for the state of Florida.
Well, it'll make Florida more reflective of its voters. Right now, we've got 3.5 million voters who are kept out of the primary process. That includes 1.6 million voters of color and 1.7 million women voters. So if we open up the primary process and allow all voters to vote, we'll get an electoral result that is much more reflective of Florida's diversity.
And we want to shift now to Ms. Rayner. The Central Florida Urban League has filed a lawsuit to actually stop counting of votes for Amendment 3, claiming that it will hurt minority-dominant House and Senate districts. Do you agree with stopping counting for this?
I do agree with stopping counting for this. I think that we need to be really transparent about what All Voters Vote actually is and why that name for this amendment is a misnomer. One of the things that Amendment 3 is going to do, it's going to suppress and thwart minority representation in minority districts, which I believe is unconstitutional. And also it's really, I think a thinly veiled attempt to curate who certain folks who have money, who they want to see be able to have elected office. So I do agree that the votes need to stop being counted. And I do agree that this is really just an attempt to really just suppress the will of the people.
And Mr. Gibson, sometimes it seems rare, but this is happening in this situation where Democrats and Republicans agree. Can you summarize the argument you made before the Supreme Court opposing Amendment 3?
Yeah, absolutely. What we said is that it's very confusing. Unfortunately, the Florida Supreme Court didn't agree with us, but apparently the only people that understand this you have to be on the Florida Supreme Court to understand it. I mean, I get calls from average voters every single day that ask me, what is this amendment and what does it do? Most people, they think that it simply opens up the primaries. It doesn't open up the primaries. It abolishes party primaries. And then it keeps third-party candidates, independent candidates, from even getting on the ballot. So what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with a very long party primary ballot. And then ultimately, you're going to get 2 candidates backed by special interests or billionaires who are going to be on the general election ballot.
I want to play a portion of a clip now from an ad from All Voters Vote featuring legendary basketball player Magic Johnson.
Amendment 3 guarantees that all voters can vote. Amendment 3 will ensure that politicians listen to everyone. Join me in supporting.
Mr. Burhans, I want to talk about this. There are different kinds of open primaries. For example, our neighboring state, Alabama, as you know, has more of a blanket primary in which you are handed a ballot for one party or another. Why not opt for that? Why not do that as Amendment 3?
Well, we think that the All Voters Vote Top 2 primary gives the power to the voters to decide. Let's trust the voters and let them vote for who they want to and not force them to pick one ballot from a party or another party. It's really that simple. You know, the First Amendment guarantees the right to freely associate, which also includes the right not to associate. And it's wrong to require 3.5 million voters to pick a party's ballot just in order to cast a meaningful ballot. And we think that's wrong. So the All Voters Vote Amendment provides the greatest amount of flexibility and empowers the voters.
Mr. Gibson, what are your thoughts on this? Would the Republican Party have objected to that other kind of an open primary, a blanket primary?
Well, listen, we think there's 10.3 million voters in Florida who affiliate with a political party. So why are we disenfranchising those 10.3 million voters and telling them, sorry, no, you don't get to pick who your party nominates or who your party is going to back. We're going to let everyone do that. And Magic Johnson, I'm glad you played that, because Magic Johnson knows a lot about this amendment because they have it in California. And if he talks to the folks in California, it's been a complete disaster. In California in 2018, you had 35 candidates on the Senate ballot. And then you had 10 Democrats, 11 Republicans. And then ultimately, what did you get? You got 2 candidates from the same party, 2 Democrats. That eliminates voter choice. It doesn't enhance it.
Ms. Rayner, same question on the blanket or open primary. Would Democrats have supported that?
You know, I tend to agree with Mr. Gibson on this. I think that once again, you're disenfranchising folks who want to have people who reflect their values, reflect their community to be elected. I mean, for example, if this amendment was, enacted in 2018, our choice for governor would have been Adam Putnam and Ron DeSantis. And quite frankly, as a Democrat, that's not, though neither of those candidates reflect someone I would like to see in office. So once again, you're disenfranchising people. And even when we think about the state house or in the state senate, you're literally disenfranchising minority communities to have folks in the house or in the senate that reflect their community, reflect their values, and that look like them.
Ms. Rayner, I want to throw some numbers at you. The financial impact study on this measure showed that moving to the top 2 open primary would add as much as $5.8 million in additional costs on local governments for each of the first 3 election cycles. Is that alone enough to remove Amendment 3?
I think that alone is enough to remove Amendment 3. Once again, it is the cost is there's no other way to say it, ridiculous. Not only that, what we would have to do to even be able to ensure that this is actually implemented appropriately, I think that it's too prohibitive. It's too cost prohibitive. And once again, I believe that this amendment is actually unconstitutional.
Mr. Burhans, what about the cost estimate? I don't see that referenced on you all's website.
Well, the cost estimate is when you break it down as the state had found, it's about 36 to 38 cents per voter over the first few election cycles. Now, contrast that with the state total spending is, in excess of 300 million. So this is not even a rounding error when it comes to the state election budget. Now, I have to correct something that was said a moment ago. Amendment 3 doesn't prohibit the parties from selecting their own candidates. And Mr. Gibson knows that very well because the Supreme Court asked him about it, and the justices force the opponents to concede that parties could conduct their own primaries if they want to. But what we shouldn't be doing is disenfranchising 3.5 million voters, including 1.6 million voters of color and 1.7 million women voters. Only a politician would argue that you would disenfranchise people by adding more people to the process. And only a bad politician would argue that you're going to disenfranchise minority voters by increasing minority voting by 1.6 million voters in the process.
Mr. Gibson, I want to get you to respond to that. And also, does the Republican Party have any concerns about the cost that it would take?
Well, we do have some concern about the cost, the $5.8 million, the taxpayer money that's going to go through that. But we have even more concern about the cost and the big money and the special interest money that's going to flow in to Florida that's to finance these types of elections. We're very concerned about that cost. But going back to what Mr. Burhan said about the party being able to nominate candidates. So the amendment does provide that parties can nominate candidates, but there's now, under this amendment, there's only really 2 ways that could happen. Number one, they're going to have to do it behind closed doors, and party bosses are going to have to pick who the nominee is. Or, and his group even conceded this, we would have to have a 3rd election before the all voters vote primary. And one thing I know that voters don't want is they don't want more elections.
Staying with Mr. Gibson for a minute, 3.7 million independent voters in Florida. That could go up as we realize the voter roll that just closed last week. Talk to them more for a moment. We've talked a lot about the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. Talk to the independent voter and explain to them exactly why this makes sense to vote no on Amendment 3.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, independent voters, one thing they care about is they don't like special interest money in politics. It's one of the things that they don't like and they want to get rid of. And what this would do is this would just infiltrate the state with special interest money. And the reason why is because if you're going to get out of a primary, if you're going to have 30 candidates on the ballot, the only way that you could get out of a 30-person primary in a state that is as expensive to run in as Florida with 10 plus media markets is you're either going to have to be a billionaire or you're going to have to be backed by a billionaire. And that is not something that I think independent voters want. It's more special interest money in politics in Florida.
Ms. Rayner, same question for you. Isn't some move to an open primary more inclusive for independents?
No, I don't believe it's more inclusive for independents. And I also think that it precludes folks like me, folks who are progressives, from running and actually winning within the state of Florida, because I really believe it stifles the voice of people. And to Mr. Gibson's point, it really actually is about funneling money into elections and funneling corporate interests and special interests into elections. Because we have to remember the person that is backing this is a person that is a billionaire and is a person that was an advisor to Rick Scott. And so I think that we have to be really transparent about who is actually supporting this, who is actually funding this. A billionaire, someone with special interests, and someone who is interested in curating who can get into office. And it wouldn't be people like me. It wouldn't be progressive folks. It would be people that they can buy and that they can do whatever, would do whatever they would have them to do.
Mr. Burhans, you're an election law and constitutional law attorney. What exactly did motivate you most to sponsor this and chair this to pass this effort for Amendment 3?
Well, we have a broken system. Our political discourse has become so divisive and vitriolic that things aren't getting done anymore. And I think people are tired of what's going on. And with the closed party system, you've got candidates and elected officials that are locked into their narrow silos, either on the very far left or the very far right. And all they have to do to win a closed party primary is to throw out the red meat to their base. They get a narrow sliver of the electorate, and they win the election. And in the process, the voices of 3.5 million voters are shut out of the process. It's not right. I think if Florida voters deserve better than what they're getting from the two major parties. And it's absolutely stunning to me that representatives of the parties bemoan special interest when the parties are the original special interest groups in America, and talk about raising money and controlling the process. That's what the parties are doing. Their message to 3.5 million voters and 1.6 million voters of color and 1.7 million women voters is sit down and shut up, because your voice doesn't matter and your vote doesn't count unless you join our party. And that's wrong. And that's what we seek to change with All Voters Vote.
We want to give everybody 30 seconds for a closing statement. We'll start with Ms. Burhans.
Well, I just said it. Thank you. This is not about the parties. The parties they'll be fine. They'll be able to have their own nominating contest if they want. This amendment is truly about empowering all voters. There are 3.5 million voters who are shut out of the process. They are legally qualified to vote. They are duly registered to vote, and their tax money goes to paying for the elections that they're precluded from. And I find it ironic that the parties bemoan the influence of billionaires and special interests. Well, they didn't have any problem taking money from Mr. Fernandez when they wanted his cash for their campaigns. But now that he wants to fix a broke system, by the way, a system which he was denied the ability to vote in a primary, that's where he's coming from. And that's where we're all coming from at All Voters Vote. Trust the voters. Let all voters vote.
Mr. Burhans,
we'll get
thank
a better
you.
result for Florida. Thank you.
Ms. Rayner, your closing statement?
As I've said, I think that this is really just an issue really to suppress the vote and to suppress the will of the people and to curate who, certain people that they, folks like Mr. Fernandez will like to see elected. At the end of the day, if Mr. Fernandez and company are very concerned about independents voting, there are other ways to achieve this. And I don't think Amendment 3 is the way to achieve it. And once again, I think that it goes against the Voting Rights Act, and it goes against the 2010 Redistricting Act here in Florida that says that there should be a certain amount of minority representation within our government. And this Amendment 3 would seek to preclude that. And so once again, I think it's a no vote on Amendment 3.
Mr. Gibson, you can close us out.
No, absolutely. Well, one of the goals of Amendment 3 is to reduce polarization and create bipartisanship. And it actually has accomplished that, because as the representative-elect, you can see we're both from different parties, but we agree here. And there is bipartisan opposition to this very, very bad idea. The only people that I think should vote yes on this are the political consultants and lobbyists. Why? Because they're going to have a very big payday if this passes. The people that should vote no on this are the average voter who cares about voter choice and who wants to limit big money and special interests from coming into our politics.
I want to say thank you to Glenn Burhans, Representative-elect Michelle Rayner, and Ben Gibson for taking part in our debate over Amendment 3. If it passes, it takes effect in January 2024. You can check out more details about Amendment 3 on our website, WESH.com. Just click on Commitment 2020.